So I'm really very new to doing podcasts, so I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to basically waffle at my microphone for about half an hour. Well, try to waffle for about half an hour. But really, I want to get to the cusp of what I'm really talking about. And yes, my words don't always come out fluently, but I guess that's the aim of the game, is me being a little bit messy with this. I'm going to try and do this unscripted, so bear with me. So I really want to talk about work-life balance because I've struggled with a work-life balance for many years, and that has not got any easier for me recently. Yes, I have a little girl who is about 9 months now, and I thought that I struggled with work-life balance beforehand, but I did not know the meaning of life balance. Wow, if I thought I didn't have any time before a child, I have even less time now. And I really don't know how people do it all. And I guess people don't do it all. That's the greatest challenge in life, is trying to fit everything in. I mean, I haven't even returned to work yet, and I don't even know how that would look because the house is consistently messy and I haven't gone back to work at all. So please do tell me if you have any secrets out there to keeping a house tidy when you have children. You're working full time. Are you both working full time? Do you have any pets? That will be one of the episodes I'd like to cover, how we're balancing life and looking after our lovely furry children. And also how you manage day to day. Do you get any time for yourself? Are you able to fit in exercise? Because that's a greater challenge in itself, is trying to fit in some time for keeping yourself fit and healthy. I would like to do an episode about eating healthy as well, because the temptation to bung in the chicken nuggets and chips, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not something I'd want to eat every day, but there's definitely nothing wrong with having something less than healthy. But trying to make nutritious meals, let's be honest, is really difficult when you're both doing 40 hours a week. You've got children, you've got pets, you've got chores. I mean, my laundry load is as big as the size of a planet. Every day there seems to be laundry, and it was bad before, but it's worse now. And I didn't realise that such a tiny little human being can make so much mess. But there we go. So yes, I'd like your tips, your secrets on keeping houses tidy, on how you manage around the place. But what I really want to talk about today is what kind of things make a difference to your work-life balance, and how that is how you came about doing that. So I really would like to hear from you guys about what you do, so that you're not just hearing me waffle on about my life for a long time, as interesting and fascinating as that can be. Cough, cough. But yes, anything that you do to balance that life. Currently, some of my thoughts are around work, especially as I consider going back to work, is the number of hours I do. So I've always been a full-time worker. There was one occasion where I dropped down to 30 hours. However, I did top that up a lot with extra shifts to try and pay for a wedding. So essentially, I've never been a part-time worker. I've always been full-time. So this is the first time I'm actually considering part-time work. Now, I know I'm in the luxury of being able to just do part-time. A lot of you guys out there are probably needing 2 people who work full-time in the household to be able to afford bills. Especially with the cost of living crisis, it can be really, really difficult out there. But if you have considered dropping hours, why did you drop hours? Did you want to spend more time with your children? Was it an affordability aspect? Or was it to get a better work-life balance? So part of the reasons I am considering dropping hours is massively to do with work-life balance. The other factor is I've had a little one now, and although a lot of people are happy to go back full time and you still have that time afterwards to spend with kids, I would prefer to actually have reduced hours and have the rest of that time to be able to spend with my child, so that I've got a little bit of time also to spend doing things around the house. I never wanted to return full time, although it would be nice to actually have her go to a childminder. I'm not going to lie, she can be very energetic. And I know a lot of people sometimes think actually going to work is like having a bit of a break from your children, if you can consider that. I have thought about it. It would be a little bit of a break and at times it'd be nice, but I would like to still have the majority of my week spent with my little girl. Now, another reason for me reducing my hours, as I've already alluded to, is to have a better work-life balance. I simply just don't want to be at work for the 37 and a half hours that I used to be. It is a lot of time to spend away from your home. And I worked really hard to get my house. Mortgages are not cheap, or renting is not cheap either. And you make your home a home. And so I want to spend more of that time at home, making it special, keeping it clean and tidy, making little differences around the house. I've got big garden projects planned for the future, lots of different things. And so I think having a full-time contract, especially when there's two working adults in the house, seems to be a lot of time spent out of the house when you essentially have worked really hard to have that house. The other reason for going part-time is my job currently, especially as a nurse, is not a remote job. There are jobs out there for nurses that can be remote working, but the majority of jobs for nurses are being on site. And a big part of that is commuting, which again will be another episode that I'd like to discuss. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. But commuting, I've done a lot of commuting in my life. I've done hour commutes. I've done 30-minute commutes. I've never had less than a 30-minute commute to my job, but it has become increasingly more difficult, especially as public transport isn't great in this country. Well, I don't know if there are any countries that excel in public transport, probably some. But also traffic is a lot worse than it used to be. Well, in my mind, it's a lot worse. Where I used to commute not so long ago, it took me over an hour. The traffic around the site has got a lot worse. The infrastructure hasn't been put in, and it just adds to your day. When you already work a 12 and a half, 13-hour shift, or however long you work, you may work office hours, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. And then if you add, whether it be a 30-minute commute or an hour commute, that is a huge chunk out of your day that you are spending going to work. And even if you mitigate that with remote working, well, I suppose that's the only way to mitigate that is to be a remote worker. But I know there is becoming increasing hesitation around remote working, which is something else I'd like to talk about. If you're a remote worker or hybrid worker, has commuting been a factor in why you decided to go to remote work or hybrid work, or was it childcare, or just wanted to be at home in the comforts of your own home and have your coffee machine or your cup of tea, or be in a comfortable chair, or I know a lot of people who may have disabilities find it easier to work from home because you have certain setups that make it easier for you, which is really important, I think, and it's great if your employer can be flexible about that. But yes, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and a little bit more about, why and how you decided to become a remote worker. But for me, one of the factors in reduced hours and in sort of deciding not to go back full time is the commuting aspect. And right now it's just hellish getting to work, and I would like to do more of a discussion around this, so please do send me your thoughts on commuting into work. But then you've got the parking, and for me, or for maybe a lot of healthcare professionals, that can be hellish. For my husband, he had quite a nice car park, he had great offices in one of his job, so he had no issues there. But currently every car park I've been to in most hospitals, it's like a battleground. It can be quite expensive. You have to pay to park. Again, another thing I'd like to hear about. Do you pay to park when you go into work? A lot of people were quite shocked that I said I had to pay to park at my workplace. Most hospitals do ask you to pay to park, although that was wavered mostly over COVID. Actually, paying to park can actually add to your expenses within a job. But most of the car parks I have been to now in most of my jobs are very full. Again, I think a lot of it might be to do with funding in the NHS. And also what you may not know is that a lot of the car parks are often not controlled by the actual hospital. So there's many battles in there, and I have spent so much time circling car parks to find a parking space. And then if you're adding that to a commute of half an hour, added to your parking time, it can be a bit of a headache, and it's just another thing that you just don't want to battle with. It adds to the stress, and that's another thing when you want to work-life balance. You don't want to really add to your stress in a week because, again, you've got children, you've got pets, you've got all sorts of things in your life, and then you add the stress of trying to park, of trying to navigate out of a busy work area. And even if you don't work at a hospital like I do, a lot of places, if you're commuting into very busy city areas, it's just so congested these days. I mean, I've regularly been to Norwich, and trying to get into the centre of Norwich is hectic to say the least, and you're at walking pace. You might as well be cycling through most of Norwich. The trains, when they're not on strike, and I know there's very valid reasons for them going on strike, have become quite expensive. So that's a factor, is the fact that it's costing quite a lot to travel in, becoming a work-life balance issue. I mean, if you are probably starting off in a career, or you're not paid very much, and then you have to spend over £1,000 on travelling, that can make a huge difference to your life, essentially, and to your expenses, because part of having work-life balance is having money that you can hopefully, feed yourself, clothe yourself, and have something to enjoy at the end of the day. I know we go to work to afford bills, but we all want to have a little bit of enjoyment at the end of it, whether it's going out for the day, but of recent that's become more and more difficult. So tell me if get in touch, let me know if that's something that's factoring into your work-life balance. Has commuting become very expensive? One of the other reasons that I would like to talk about as well is just the times for working. So is there any flexibility? I mean, the first thing, something that's become very apparent to me since I've become a mother, is one, the availability of childcare, and also the expense of childcare. I knew it was expensive, but wow, I was in for a shock when I started going down this minefield of childcare, and it has become a factor in one of the reasons why I wouldn't be returning full-time into a position, because childcare is that expensive. So if I can mitigate that, I mean, some people are very lucky, they have parents or friends or people who will do it for free. I currently have a mother who's very helpful and willing, but she's still of working age. And again, with the working age going up to 67 and things becoming 67, 68, things becoming tighter and tighter, I won't have as much availability from her as I would like to. So that also impacts on your work-life balance, whether you have childcare commitments or if you're a carer for someone. Being full-time is just too difficult, particularly if you're both full-time in the household. It's almost becoming a bit of a gamble, would I say, or not gamble. It would be just sort of day in, day out doing the general slog and then trying to sort of rush and get everything else done on the weekend if you don't work weekends. There's no easy solution. I suppose you have to do what is best for you. But that's the whole point of this podcast, is to try and gather ideas from each other, see what, things can help improve your life. So I think one of the biggest things to try and think about when you're trying to balance a work-life balance career is thinking about hours. Now, that when you're younger, it's not so much of a problem. You feel like you've got the freedom of the world. I do feel with hours, so for a brief while I looked at jobs outside of an NHS contract. I looked at something different to nursing because I thought that might be interesting to consider. But I have seen a lot of contracts are now pushing from 37.5 hours, 40 hours, and even slightly more than that. A job that I went to the other day, or a job that I was considering, was potentially about 45 hours. Now, I know 40 hours is quite standard for most full-time jobs, but it's a lot of hours. I mean, again, get in touch. I want to hear what your views are about hours when it comes to work-life balance. But 40 hours in a week, I mean, is a huge chunk of your time. I know probably in other countries, Japan, they tip way more hours than what we do. But there are a lot of places in Europe particularly who standard full-time working hours, I believe, is probably more close to 35, maybe even 32, which is better, so much better. And I would like to know whether their productivity is much, much better than what ours is, because at the end of the day, working lots of hours, that's when, you're getting tired, and it all factors in. But yes, I'd like to hear your views on hours as well. Again, thank you for listening to my waffle. So we've talked about hours. We've talked about childcare commitments and commuting. What other things impact on having a work-life balance? I'd like to hear from people as well. I'm going to do an episode about being at home. So if you've decided to stay at home, and what has influenced you to be staying at home. And for a while I did consider just being a stay-at-home mum. But as much as I love my little one, I do want to do something else. And there's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home mum. I think it's a really great idea. I just thought I would like to just do something else. But I did look for part-time jobs outside of the NHS, and the NHS does seem to be one of the, I would like to say, flexible employers. I've read a lot of stories from people that have said they found it difficult to chop and change their hours, and please, again, would love to hear your thoughts about it, what your difficulties were. Again, I can keep you anonymous if you'd like to. But I have found that for contracts, trying to get reduced contracts, particularly as a nurse, is a lot easier than if you're trying to go into a private sector. For example, I did apply for a part-time job in an industry. I'm going to keep the details a bit loose because trying to keep an anonymity. And I went for quite a few interviews because I felt like trying something different for nursing, and was trying to, I basically was looking for part-time hours. By part-time hours, I did mean 30 hours. I found it extremely difficult, particularly if you're going as a career changer. And I do understand the reasons why employers do want full-time workers. There's a lot to learn, especially if you're starting in a career, and it might be different if you're already in an established career. They might consider more reduced hours because you already have the capabilities, the skills to do the job, so there is less training involved. But still, part-time working would be great in the industries, even if there's some flexibility. But I think that's going to be extremely difficult if you're coming in. That there's so much competition for jobs out there, or for a lot of specific jobs, should I say. I think if you're going into a career where they're in desperate need of people, but maybe hospitality or the care industry, there is probably more chance that you're going to get flexible working standards and part-time. But if you're going into an industry that's oversubscribed, I don't know, marketing or something like that, going in and you're learning the career, it's likely that part-time is going to be less considered. Well, I feel it will be, because every time I have tried to bring up part-time hours, and again, this is going from what I consider 37 and a half hours to be a standard as full-time working, and asking for 30 hours, it has been a no, which has made it really difficult, one, to apply for jobs. Like, I went on Indeed and I literally put part-time anything, and the jobs that I got, there was very far and few between. And I haven't got much, I haven't found other websites like Working Mums, etc., to be as helpful, because a lot of the jobs on this have seemed to be jobs for skilled workers or people who have already got, a skill set. And so, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I'm always open to hearing if people have different experiences, but that has been my experience so far. And so it's been really tough, because I have generally wanted to at times try something different, but I've found that flexibility with employers, even if they have flexibility, if you're trying to get into a job, there is so much competition out there. It can be quite disheartening when you go onto a job, you apply on Indeed, and it's about 1,000 people have applied for that job. And even if you get to interview stage, you might be up against 10, 20 people. If you then come in and say, would you consider part-time hours, you could virtually be axing yourself from the job already. So it's do you sacrifice a bit of work-life balance and then down the road ask for part-time hours? It's really difficult, which is why I found it such a steep learning curve trying to apply for different jobs. Again, would love to hear your opinions out there. But that is essentially some of my views on work-life balance. Again, there might be so many other factors out there. For example, I know a couple of people who find that they don't have as much of a work-life balance because they're getting messages after work about work. For example, at midnight, getting messaged saying, can you have a look at this, or can you do that? Which is, again, an added stress. And that's another thing I'd like to think about is, when you do your work, are you, say, pens down or computers off at 5 o'clock and that's it? Or do you feel pressured into doing extra work that you are or are not paid for afterwards? And so that is impacting on the balance you have in your work and your life. Do you find that you just aren't satisfied in a job anymore, and that's impacting your work-life balance? Because if you're not happy in a job, then is that really a balance in life? But then is there something keeping you in a job? So many different topics to uncover here, so many different things to think about. Would love to talk about things where I'm not just waffling on, as much as I love to hear myself waffle. But yes, and I would like to cover different topics as well. You know, again, stay-at-home mums, freelancers, like to hear how work is for you as a freelancer or a self-employed person, how you manage having a work-life balance. I want to hear about things about how you maintain maybe a relationship. You know, are you able to get in date nights? Are you able to go out and have holidays, or is your annual leave a factor in your work-life balance? Have you said no to a job because you're not going to have enough annual leave entitlement? All these different things to explore. Would love to hear your views. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed the first episode of Work-Life Balance. I am Messy Jessy, so named because I can be a little bit messy, hands up. And this has been the first episode of my podcast, Work-Life Balance. Looking forward to hearing all your views, and thank you for listening.